mean, I think our view in FX Stage Research is that there is a need for the government to adjust the pump price of PMS, and they also adjust the electricity tariff to reflect reality, such that that will enable investors to come to that area. And then adjustment of PMS will free up some revenue for government to carry out its activities, and that may likely impact inflation. But without that, we think inflation will remain in the region that you mentioned. I mean, it's a little bit of a lower double digits this year.
Yes, but again, I asked a question about whether or not you think it's more likely that they will increase the pump price or not. I guess there are two things to read. What's the body language of the government? How are they reacting to, the discussion around poverty and so forth? But on the flip side, there is the fiscal situation and the urgency to boost revenues and cut expenditure. So which one do you think, how do you see it playing out? Okay,
I think the body language of the president suggests that it may not likely adjust the PMS price. But then, is that the best solution approach to managing the current situation we have? Suggesting sincere view is that's not the best way to manage it.
Again, the discussion around the sustainability of that position. But then you clearly make the point about the need to increase revenues, and you spoke quite a bit on VAT as an option. So maybe we should focus on that, on your suggestions about how the government potentially can increase their VAT revenues. You talked about leveraging existing associations and ecosystems in the informal sector, because we know that's where there is the greatest non-compliance. And then also you talk about the government trying to work with different operators in the financial system. I imagine they're talking about the banks there to also increase compliance of those in the formal market. So overall, first of all, let's get your thoughts on what potentially the government can raise if it were to move in this direction.
Okay, so given what government is doing now in terms of where we look at the data of the household consumption, and then we look at it with the VAT collection that the government had raised in the last 5 years, and we realize that it's quite small, right? Yes, there are some items that are not subject to exempted from VAT, but then if you look at the totality of it, deduct those items from there, the ratio of VAT revenue to household consumption is quite low. Now, we are due some reasons to that. The large informal sector we have in the country, over 41% of the total GDP is in the informal sector by National Bureau of Statistics figure. IMF says over 60%. That is large, and because it is difficult for you to get taxes from that sector. And then there are a couple of leakages, non-remittances of VAT to the appropriate authorities, and then weak consumption in the country. So we recommend and we make some suggestions about how you can stimulate consumption. When you stimulate consumption, more people will be able to buy things, and then on which you charge VAT and get revenue, number one. Number two, then we think about leveraging the association and some ecosystem, like you mentioned, in the informal sector with the current structure, such that they can discuss with them the benefit of paying VAT, and they can get from them. For instance, look at the Association of Transport Workers. I'm not sure they are paying that. And then if you speak to them, if you pay through the association, then we can even be able to provide some, repair the roads around your area. Then they can be encouraged to do that. Then leveraging technology to ensure that through, financial inclusion to bring more people to the financial system. And when you do that, you have access to their transactions, and on that you can be able to get,
I think from a strategic outlook for the economy, it's simply unsustainable for the informal sector to be left out of, if you like, contributing their share. I know in the 50s and 60s it wasn't the case, but the culture has certainly changed over time. So there's clearly a big discussion to be had on how we're going to get the informal sector contributing their fair share, even though we also know that poverty is a big issue in that space. But on the point about the private sector, now, there's always been this discussion about sanctions, and of course there's a lot of pushback from the private sector given their challenges, because it's also a tough time for them. How effective do you think that could be?
For me, I think when we speak to operators in the private sector and even in the public, one of the things that we don't have so much in this part of the world is trust in government. You look at even the PMS that we're talking, price that we're talking about, the subsidy that we're talking about, the electricity tariff, and even the tax, is the fact that if we pay it, what is the benefit that the taxpayers actually derive from there? We still provide our own securities. We still provide our own, so many things that
electricity
that we provide. So, but for me, through engagement and the fact that government is also showing clearly these are the things that we are doing. Remember, during Fashola's administration in Lagos State, he was saying this road was constructed by the taxpayers' money, and then increasingly showing things like that. I mean, the DMO is raising Sukuk now, a number of roads in the country where they are making Sukuk working. So those are kind of things that we can do. I mean, during Jonathan also, they came up with a particular institution, subsidiary investment, whatever it is called.
Program,
program. And then, but after a while, we didn't see exactly the impact of that on the public. So if people see exactly what we are doing with these taxes, with this subsidy that is removed, then people will be willing to comply and to pay. But there is no alternative to we paying the taxes because government does not have enough money.
I guess it's, again, another opportunity to make that point that the status quo just cannot, it's just not sustainable. I mean, on several levels, we just need to see reforms, and that part of the social contract between the people and the government is something that both sides need to take more seriously. Thank you so much for coming in today. I've been speaking to Ayodele Akinwumi, Head of Research at FSDH Merchant Bank.